Welcome to #52Needs, and this week we are talking about safety. And I'm so delighted to have with me Kingsley Mortimer, who has a background in music and who has worked for 4 decades as a professional entertainer. Before COVID, Kingsley worked for P&O, the cruise line company, as a piano bar entertainer. Kingsley went through a recovery from alcohol and drugs over 2 decades ago, and most recently founded the Safe Men Project. Safe men, safe families, safe communities. Kingsley's mission statement is, just for today, I'm deliberately creating life with radical authenticity and wisdom, making choices that bring possibility, prosperity, freedom, joy, and inspiration to everyone I meet and influence. Hi, Kingsley, welcome.
Hi, Angela. Thank you.
Okay, well, this is your topic, safety, that's your thing.
It is. Well, I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert in the area of safety, but Safe Men is, I'm very passionate about this subject and about helping particularly men, but it's not a gender thing, to have the access to the ability to find ways to set boundaries and become transformed in their paradigm of the way that they interact with others and community.
Which means you're definitely going to be a guest on my next year's podcasting series, which is all about boundaries.
Excellent.
Okay, well, we're on needs for this time. So we all have a need for safety, and that expresses itself in all sorts of different ways. And we're talking about safety at home. And in the context of your work with Safe Men, and I know that, you know, this is really important. It's not against domestic violence or anything like that. It's about being safe at home. So can you tell us what that means?
Yes, exactly. It's coming from a perspective of the positive, what we can do to create positive influence rather than, you know, beating or shaming the negative side of you know, situations and circumstances that families and communities might find themselves in. It's, you know, one of the reasons why we're talking today, Angela, is I was scanning through social media, looking for people who I might be able to, you know, like develop a connection with around the Safe Men project that I'm doing. And I came across a campfire project, which you were on, and you were talking about, I don't know whether you were talking about safety, but one of the things that really impacted me was there was a couple of women, and one was yourself, and your perspective, the men were talking about safety from a certain you know, perspective. Your perspective was like, the men were saying, oh, last time I felt unsafe was maybe, you know, 6 months ago or a year ago, and, you know, this happened or that happened. And both you and the other female said, well, it was a few days ago or yesterday, you know, and or today, that's right. And that really, you know, like, it kicked me in the guts, like it cut my heart. And I realized that once again, it's not a gender thing, but generally women walk around community feeling a lot more unsafe than men. And that's why it was so important to put that gender, you know, on the Safe Men aspect, because why not take responsibility for it, men? Come on, men, why not? Let's take responsibility. If we're the ones that aren't, you know, we're privileged not to feel so unsafe most of the time, and the female aspect of society is feeling unsafe, then let's take responsibility for that.
Okay, so I hear you. I think we definitely need to step up with regards to, you know, making sure that men create more safety, because there's a lot of, and we've both talked about that before, there's a lot of acceptance that women are not safe. You know, I mean, when we talk about, for example, we talk about statistics and it says so and so many women were raped last year. So many women were attacked by their partner, were attacked or killed by, you know, it doesn't say so many men raped, so many men killed, so many men attacked. So that's one thing. So I think it's really important that we change the language around that and what safety really means. But since we're talking about needs, and we've talked about this a lot in the context of safe men, is that men often don't know who they are anymore. And men have a need for safety as well. And that's not really defined either. You know, that's something where it just goes, oh, well, men are more safe because, you know, they feel more safe more often because they're bigger, they're stronger, they know how to defend themselves, they've got the upper body strength, whatever reasons people give. But men want to save just as much, you know, as women do, right?
Yeah, I believe that's true. One of the early conversations we had, I remember we were talking about tribal cultures and how the role of the men in tribal cultures, and this goes right across the board for all different types of tribal cultures, is their primary purpose was to protect the women and the children in the tribe, to protect them. So that made the tribe feel safe.
Yeah.
And so, look, I'm not going to go into all the dynamics of tribal warfare and things like that, because, you know, like that's the violent side of it. But looking at it from the perspective of this is my tribe, and this is how I keep this tribe safe. Okay. Now, what happens when those tribal here's the boundary thing again. Those boundaries start blurring into our modern community where we don't have tribes, although what happens is we still have this kind of tribal mentality within nations, you know, and there's still warring between nations and in this kind of thing. You're different to me, so I'm scared of you, and I'm going to create fear within my tribe, and we're going to fight you and make you the enemy. You know, there's still that kind of like, which is kind of, that's the negative side of that, you know, like keeping your tribe safe. You know, like it's not the type of thing where, okay, we're safe now, or we feel safe, so we're going to back off. You know, like you're on that side of the river, we're on that side of the river, we're all happy now. No, modern society doesn't seem to do that. It's kind of like, no, we still don't like you, even though you're on the other side of the river, because you're different to us.
Yeah.
You know? And so there's still that fear brewing, especially through media and things like that, the obvious channels. And there's reasons for that. We're not going to go into any kind of you know, like the dynamics of politics and things like that. We'll be here all day, won't we, if we go into that? But the thing is, what we need to get back to is the underlying idea of how to protect those more vulnerable to us. And going back to how do men learn to do that? How do men feel safe? Men feel safe, this is from a perspective of a male, men feel safe when they're modeled how to be safe by older men. Okay, and not necessarily older, but people within that tribe, so to speak, that are given positions of authority. And now in you know, the dynamics of ancient tribal culture was every man went through an initiation to become a man around the age of 14. So much of our community has lost that, you know, so boys go off by themselves, get drunk one night, and that's their initiating, you know, like initiation into manhood. It's usually unaccompanied by a man, you know, and I know for me, look, when I went and did that, you know, at an early age, probably before 14, it was like we didn't want the men to be around as boys. You know, because we were being naughty. Well, we were drinking underage to start off with, so that was illegal, and so there was all that shame and guilt involved in it. We never got modeled, you know, like exactly how to actually make that transition from boyhood to manhood. When the boys that I've seen who have been given a really stable and mature, you know, like transition into manhood, they are safe men. Not only are they safe externally, but they feel safe as well when you ask them. So I think that's what's missing in modern society today, that you know, like initiation.
Yeah. Well, you know, my thing is emotions, right? And for me, safety extends also to emotional safety. And I
Yes.
think when we talk about men and men not necessarily knowing how to be safe, or they are not fulfilling the need for safety, that also includes the need to be emotionally safe. And a lot of men are not allowed to express themselves safely. So their emotions, at least. So there's a lot of shaming for having emotions. There's a lot of, you're not allowed to have them, you should just power through. And that's, again, so you have, on one hand, you have to be the protector, you have to be the provider, you should just get through things, and you can't have emotions. And if you, and we both know that if you push down emotions, specifically anger, frustration, sadness, all of those unpleasant, emotions, when we're not fulfilling our needs, they explode, they come to the forefront at some point, because there's only so much pushing down you can do before something will boil over. And that's something that there's no initiation for that either. The only initiation for that is, oh, come on, let's just ignore that. Let's go have a beer, drown your sorrows, drown your anger, drown your whatever it is in alcohol, it'll go away. It's like, or, with women, it might be, let's just go shopping, this whole, just pushing it away, it could be. But again, safety means, emotional safety means, I'm here for you. I'm listening without judgment. Tell me what's going on. And I'll just hold what I call the bucket, and you can just spew into that, and I'll hold it. And, and I'm hearing you. I'm not fixing it. And that's safe for me as well. And I don't think that we teach people that either.
Yeah, well, if we get used to somebody holding that bucket, we won't have to spew. We can just pour into it, yes. and it will be a lot more, gentler. I'm going to be vulnerable, and I say, from a male perspective, that emotional side of feeling safe is not external. It doesn't come from external places. It actually comes from trusting myself.
Yes.
When I've felt the most unsafe throughout my life, the 52, 53 years that I've been on this planet so far, it's always from a point of am I safe? Am I being a safe man in community? When I'm not being safe in community or in my family, that's when I feel unsafe. Not so much when something is threatening me.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yes. But do you feel safe when you express your emotions?
Well, look, if I have the ability to express my emotions, then they're not going to come out sideways. And especially when it comes to things like anger or frustration. These are the obvious emotions which gets, manifest violence. And so, because I've done a lot of work, especially in recovery from alcohol and drugs, there's some really great inventory processes that have been developed in the last, only 60, 70 years in humanity's history. Really great tools called the 12 steps that are able to really look at oneself and provide an opening for a transformation in somebody's personality and way of being, not in their behavior. Now, if someone has an experience where they're transformed in their way of being, then the behavior just changes, or their behavior is transformed.
Yeah.
I try and avoid words like change, because change is just making something better. So often it's not something that's getting better. It's actually something entirely new.
Transformation.
Yes. That's right. So, these are the tools that are available today. But a lot of people in community and society don't know that they're even there. It's kind of like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm unconscious about most of it anyway, because my anger is coming out sideways. Violence seems to be almost normalized, like you can turn on Question Time for the Australian politics and see people escalating in verbal abusive language as a normal way of communicating. And so why wouldn't you do that within your own family to get your own way?
Yeah. So when we're talking about safety, it says, yes, we're talking about physical safety, knowing that somebody doesn't hit me or doesn't, violate my physical integrity in any kind of shape or form. But it's also about, again, being psychologically safe, having the ability to have, like somebody doesn't yell at me, somebody doesn't and there's, again, sometimes maybe even intellectual safety, where somebody doesn't tell me, and I see this. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I overhear people say to a child, God, you are so dumb. What kind of idiot are you? That doesn't create safety. That doesn't create safety for a child to say, I've had an idea here, or I don't agree with you. Could we talk about this? Or I like to find out more, when that's shut down immediately. So on one hand, we've got physically not safe. You might get slapped for having an opinion, then being told that you're stupid. Emotions you're not supposed to have, anger or frustration or anything like that. What are you? And I'm using the word deliberately, a poofta, because I've heard that as well, because supposedly your sexual orientation has everything to do with how you express emotions, which I don't get. I mean, like, that's a mystery to me. And also, spiritual safety. When I'm in 12 steps, there's a spiritual aspect. And that's when you say, when you feel safe and you've got a spiritual connection to whatever you choose to have, even as an atheist, that is also something that is really important, purpose, whatever you want to call it. Yes. But we don't teach people that.
No. Well, it is available.
Yes,
that's the thing, and that's what Safe Men wants to do, is wants to be a
catalyst.
Yeah. Like we want to go out and campaign in as many different medias as possible to be able to let people know that there is ways of experiencing a new paradigm, both personally, for our families, for the community, and for society. That's really important, that people even know that that's available, because the cycle. I understand the cycle of addiction. Violence is addictive. Anger is addictive. Some of these emotions that we've talked about are very addictive. They trigger off cortisols and serotonins, and like you can name the actual chemicals in the brain that the pituitary gland becomes dependent upon. And so, and once again, I'm not an expert in that area. GPs and doctors would be able to tell you more about that type of thing, and psychiatrists and even a lot of psychologists would know a lot of that information. And so, like to break that cycle, a big part of breaking the cycle of addiction to violence and like wanting to control, wanting to manipulate to get your own way, is letting go of the shame. And so shame is part of the relapse cycle that you go through. Like within the family dynamic, particularly, you go through this cycle of the violence happens. Then you go through the shame of it and the regret, this I'm sorry and blah blah blah. Then you go back to the pretend normal, and then eventually the violence erupts again, because nothing's actually been done about it. Once you actually can break that cycle, okay, because we are creatures of habits. We love, we live in a world on a planet that goes through seasons, and no one can stop the seasons. In a lot of ways, you can't stop these habitual cycles that our own, lives go through, until we break one of those patterns. No one's going to break the pretend normal, because that's the comfort zone. So, but and no one's, it's very difficult to break it in the violent, actual incident stage, because, we're escalated, and how do you pull back from that? The place that I found where you can break it is in the shame part of it. Now, at first I just thought, no, this is a cop-out. Like I've acted out, I'm ashamed of it, and now I'm going to, it's been suggested to me to not feel shame. This sounds like a cop-out, but I was willing to try anything by that stage. And once I actually broke that shame I just refused to feel shame after acting out, I stopped acting out. Now, I thought it was a miracle. I thought, how did that happen? But now I understand in hindsight that it broke the cycle.
Because you took action, you did something differently, or
yeah, and it didn't seem like much. Okay, I'm just not going to feel shame about what I just did. You know, I'm just not going to feel shameful.
But you didn't justify it either. You didn't go,
no, definitely not. Yeah. And that's why I felt like, oh, is this a cop-out? When it was first suggested to me by somebody else, I thought, is this a cop-out? You know? So, you know, like, yeah, it's a very fine line. You know, we're not talking about a psychopathic person. We're talking about, you know, like a normal, you know, a normal psychologically well person, which is most of us. And we all have gone through this. Everyone's been told. I don't think there's anyone on this planet that hasn't been told that they're stupid for doing something, just for being human, for doing, you know, doing something that was just a human response to a normal response to an abnormal situation.
So what do you do instead? I mean, like you don't go into shame, but you have to go into another direction.
Well, that's when there's other tools that are there to help me. So, you know, like meditation, physical activity. These are probably the two biggest ones that help to direct my, because I had to redirect my thinking, you know. I used, you know, things like rubber bands on the wrist to flick to give me, you know, what psychologists call off ramps for some of that thinking. And so the rubber bands work well for me. There's other ones as well, you know, like counting and smelling 5, you know, things and looking at 5 things and, you know, all those kind of things. There's a whole lot of tools available.
So that's the important thing. Instead of going into something you no longer want to feel, which is a sure way of making sure that that happens again, because, you know, please, whatever you do, do not think of a pink elephant.
Yeah, we're both thinking of pink elephants.
Exactly. So it's about finding different ways of, as you said, off-ramping, of changing it, transforming it into something else.
That's
okay.
Right.
So since this is a podcast about needs, and we all have this need for safety. Not everybody acts out in that sense of getting totally violent, but we do get loud. We do yell, scream, and shout. You know, and that could be potentially very intimidating for other people. I know I grew up with that. I mean, I would be surrounded by men specifically who would just absolutely explode. And they didn't necessarily raise a hand, but just the fact that they would blow up would create a huge amount of anxiety. And then, of course, there was this thing of don't make him angry. I'm like, he's already angry. This has nothing to do with me. But the idea is to really, as you said, it's being responsible, taking account, being accountable for how we feel, and then transforming that into something that's much more productive, much more constructive. So what I would invite people to do who are listening to this is find out what safe means for you, and when are you accepting that somebody is really not safe, but you are just doing it because you don't want to make them feel angry. I really think about that. Have you got any other tips? Because I mean, obviously, this is a much longer conversation.
It is. You've brought up the whole codependency thing now. You know, don't make dad angry. You know, like mum's codependent and totally, you know, enmeshed with the father who's manipulating to try and get his own way.
Or the mother.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, like that opens a can of worms. And once again, this is, you know, codependency has become normalized within most of society these days. Not just in relationships and in families, but in workplaces as well. So, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about.
I was going to say, let's talk about that. And
in the next podcast.
That is a really good place to stop then, and we'll talk about that now. And thank you so much. This has hopefully, I mean, it has definitely been stimulating and thought-provoking for me, and I hope for everybody who's listening and watching. And thank you so much, and we'll see you on the podcast part 2.
Okay, thanks, Angela.
In work, at work. Thanks, Kingsley.